Om Mapuyantu Mamangani Vakpanas Chakshuhu Shrochamatra Balamindriyani Cha Sarvani Sarvam Brahma Upanishadam Mahabrahma Nirakuryam Mama Brahma Nirakaroda Nirakarana Astva Nirakaranam Meastu Tadatmani Nirateya Upanishatsu Dharmaste Mai Shantu Te Mai Shantu Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. May our bodies experience perfect health to know Brahman. May our life force flow unimpeded into Brahman. May our minds expand in their capacity to know Brahman. Because the Upanishads state that all existence is Brahman, therefore may we never deny Brahman. May Brahman never deny us. May there be no rejection of Brahman ever by us. We who are dedicated to the realization of the Atman within. May all the divine qualities cited in the Upanishads also abide within us. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishovahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May Brahman sustain us. And may Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. And so with these few slokas from the Upanishads, which is the main subject for today in our 4-class course on points and principles about Brahman from the Upanishads, we enter into, after a 2-week break over the last Sundays because of the online seminar we gave and the teaching of the 4 yogas, classes that I gave on Advaita Academy. But now we meet back again to our regular time on Sundays in the afternoon here in Hawaii to enter into this 4-class series, which is right in the middle of home for us as Vedantas. That is, Swami Vivekananda had a choice before he came to America and England in 1893 for the Parliament of Religions in America, mainly, to bring any of the darshanas of India. And of course we know that he brought bits and pieces of others to introduce to us. But what he settled on was the Vedanta would be best for the Westerners because they were very active, for one thing, maybe too restless for their own good, and needing, therefore, that softening of sattva that Vedanta can give the mind. Just upon even hearing the premises and the principles. And that's what this course is called, Points and Principles. So it was some time ago in early SRV days, back in the 1990s, that I scoured the Upanishads with an eye particularly or specifically to finding out what the Upanishads said. We know that that's one of the 3 of the Prasthanatrayam. That means the 3 great landmarks in scriptural history in the world, according to the Vedas and the rishis, are the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and the Brahma Sutras. So Upanishads form the very crux and essence of Vedanta. Anta means end and Veda means Vedas. So there are 4 Vedas, and out of those 4 Vedas came, well, at least that we know of, 108 Upanishads coming from those 4 divisions. You might say 5 divisions, with one of the Vedas being divided into 2. So we know that these teachings are the very essence of Vedanta. So Upanishad is Vedanta. If you take the word Vedanta apart, then you'll find its meaning the final portion of the 4 Vedas that was in the Upanishadic era, which was also a 4-part process in cosmology. So in the Upanishads, they're known for non-duality, and speaking of all the subjects that the Hindu Dharma holds from the perspective of non-duality. But we know that there are many beings as well as many teachings in the Upanishads which aren't specifically non-dualistic. And so we have to remember that the rishis are speaking on these topics from the standpoint of non-duality. When the novice or the initiate or the intermediate person, that is, studies the Upanishads, particularly from another country, they're more apt to see things from the standpoint of the dualism that they've been raised in. As many of the religions, Semitic religions, are based in dualism, that is, God and mankind are separate. But to put it just very simply and quickly, but in the Upanishads we have to remember, in India they were always speaking from the standpoint of Advaita Vedanta. And non-duality was the whole atmosphere and perspective from which they wanted to introduce other subjects that were of cosmic and collective and individual nature. So there again you have the ancient rishis interested in and also very keen on informing living beings about the apparent divisions of Brahman. How it's rupa, for instance. We were talking in the car on the way over here. Rupa is a funny word. In Sanskrit it means form and form, if you just put the 2 rupas together. But rupa and arupa means that Brahman is formless, arupa, but it can associate or take forms. It can make itself appear as forms. So it's a beautiful turn of phrase, if you want to say that in how we say in English, using the Sanskrit to turn something that is always tending towards two-ness or manyness back towards its original source, which is indivisibility, which is not two-ness. Can't really call it oneness either. Not only is that rather cliche nowadays, not understood very well, because they're thinking of oneness in terms of eka, you see, like ekarupa, one form, or numerical one. But it's all-pervasive one. Vyapi, it's called. All-pervasiveness in Sanskrit is one of the rules of thumb of Advaita. So it can't be put really in terms of one or two or many at all. It transcends both, which is why Sri Ramakrishna said Brahman is with form, it's beyond it's beyond both form and formlessness. So he was a knower of Advaita. That was his main, can't really say path, and can't really say darshana. It was the way in which he transmitted the truth, which is also non-dual. So to use words brings it down to a qualified level, so they call that Vishishtadvaita. It's a qualified non-duality. You're still speaking about non-duality, and you should know that you're doing it if you're a rishi or if you're in the know. You're doing it from a standpoint of oneness, not two-ness, indivisibility, all-pervasiveness. And then you say, oh, okay, now I see what you're saying. Now I can allow for these terms without compromising the truth. So you get on board with that kind of teaching style. And if you don't, then you have all sorts of arguments and all sorts of doubts come up, and you're not following the tradition, and you run afoul of truth and the Dharma. So truth and Dharma have to go together, rather like Jnanam and Bhakti have to go together, like two wings of a bird. And when they talk about the dual, that is what's departed, apparently so, from the confines of this all-pervasive oneness, and showing itself up to be expressive, or like an ocean breaking into waves, that it does have manifestations untold within it, infinite. Then you find out that when the student or the intermediate, probably even the adept, wants to consider formlessness, which is a thing unique to Indian darshana, the country of India, is that they're not taking refuge in the world, and they're not taking refuge in heaven, is the way I've been putting it lately. They're taking refuge in either the formless Brahman, and if that's not possible due to capacity or karma or situation, then they'll take refuge in the feet of Brahman, Brahmapada. So that's basically the highest of God with form. That's called Ishvara. Or you could put it, anything from Ishvara on down to a certain point is in the cosmic level of things. So when they're speaking to you about anything that apparently departs the confines of non-duality, apparently so, even though this perspective is kept sacrosanct, they're talking about a threefold teaching. And that's what you see on these charts here. Points and principles of the Upanishads is how this was. And we haven't taken these up and looked at them for a long time. This particularly I wanted to do a whole retreat on of 3 or 4 days, so you'd have 6 or 7 classes on it. But we're not able to meet so easily these days, and all of you watching know why. So this isolation that we have to assume, which is not entirely a bad thing, giving us time to stay at home, teach our children, learn the Dharma, meditate, and practice patience and fearlessness and all the things that you need to have in a constantly changing world. Then you need teachings on this Triputi here, and so you look at the points and the principles. The principles are inviolable. They might as well all be pillars. I've often talked about non-duality as resting on 2 great pillars, the pillar of Ajativada and the pillar of Aparinama. Ajativada means beings, not only beings, entities and objects are unborn. It's a very hard thing for people to understand. It's called unoriginated or non-originated. So the path of Ajativada is those who know that nothing's ever created and nothing's ever destroyed. And so that would apply to everything. And look at the Buddhist philosophies, and they're talking about everything rising and falling, and you just see it all as a manifestation of Buddha nature, even the thing in itself. So it might be in appearance, and it might be in motion, and it might have all of these vagaries attached to it that the unschooled mind could get confused by. But if you're just watching it rise and fall, and your mind is a witness to it, then of course the fact that it's either real or unreal doesn't even come into consideration, does it? Because obviously you're the witness and you're it. It's the greatest game of cosmic tag in existence. When Krishna put his hand on Arjuna's head and gave him, on the battlefield, gave him the vision, or when Sri Ramakrishna put his hand on Swami Vivekananda and sent him into a non-dual state when he was a teenager. It's the greatest game of cosmic tag ever. You're it, Krishna and Sri Ramakrishna both said. And now deal with it. See what happens when everything disappears in front of you and all you see is the light of Brahman. Even objects, as Sri Ramakrishna said, I went to the wax museum and there was a light in everything, shining, but it was all made of wax. That's like my samadhis, he said. So all things, people, objects, houses, whatever, you name it, it's all just made of wax, as it were. And there's a light behind it all. And so that's precisely how Swami Vivekananda, the young Naran, felt when Sri Ramakrishna put his hand, hasta, on hastadiksha, put it on Swami Vivekananda's head and said, "Are you the one?" So he saw everything fall away, just like wax figurines melting in fire or something. He just came up and above all the objects, and everything disappeared. And he was young, and he hadn't had those profound experiences which he had later in life, in that lifetime yet. So of course he was shocked to see that by a touch of a mere fakir. He said, "I'll never let him do that to me again," he said when he left. How that man got a hold of me and made me see that, or see nothing. So all of this in context to the fact that what is seen by the seer will disappear as the seer comes into a non-dual state of understanding. That's what's underlying everything. I was thinking about that word yesterday, underlying. It's a queer English word. The average person would say earth is underlying, and the sailor would say water's underlying, and the astronaut would say ether is underlying. The walker of fire would say fire is underlying. But the spiritual person will know that the spirit is underlying everything, and it's formless. And like a dancer needs a stage, that's that foundation for everything, underlying. So to get to what's underlying, you're going to have to strip away all the coverings, all the upadhis or sheaths or false superimpositions or adhyasa, however you want to put it. Take away and separate the wheat from the chaff and see the underlying reality in everything. The substratum is another English word we use. So that can be done then by following the tradition in such a way that when you begin to speak truth, like Buddha had to finally do when he preferred to be silent about his great state, the great understanding, as the American Indians would call it, his nirvana. So, he wanted to be silent about it, but they came and he was obviously changed and was shining with this light, kind of underlying everything. So they wanted him to speak. So he had to come out of silence and speak. So and you'd have to, with reticence, come out of that non-dual state and begin to speak. So the best way to do that would be in terms of Dharma and truth. The Dharma that expresses the truth like nothing else can. The best that words can manage. So those words are the Divine Mother's words of wisdom. They're filled with intelligent particles, even the words themselves, sound and so forth. Shabdartha pratyaya is the word that comes to mind. We wouldn't have anything like that in the English language or any language in the world. It's in Sanskrit. It means that the sound, the meaning, and the idea and the object and its potential for manifestation are all floating somewhere in sound, shabda, pratyaya. And it has to be brought together, and that happens here on the physical plane. All of this has been brought together out of the realm of ideas because the words were filled with intelligent particles, and so the yogi will begin to see all of this as his own intelligence. And objects won't then stultify or put him off or put him on in terms of attachment anymore. He sees it all as his own wisdom. He's got it for all time. And so he won't get attached to the object like other people who think that, oh, maybe that came about through some other process and it's got some secret to it. It's something I want and I desire it and so forth. He's already got it, you see. It came out of his own intelligent thinking process. So may our minds, may we not find fault to each other. May Brahman infill our thinking process. We chant it every time we talk about the Dharma. So when you talk about the Dharma then, you would come down to get more to the point of this class, because we have 4 classes to divide all of this up into. And this is probably all of 5 minutes to go through that. I think we did that a few classes ago. The Tower of Truth. That's really the principles of Brahman. It's amazing you can find so many, but each of these are like pillars, and you might say they're sub-pillars to those two, what I was just talking about, a Jativada, that there's no creation and destruction going on for anything. That's just rid yourself of that idea. It's just the mind projecting things and withdrawing things, and it happens on 3 levels. On a very powerful level, it happens on the cosmic level. And at an individual level, it's also happening. And those 3 shouldn't be at odds with each other, nor should you look at them and separate them. You must see it all as one continuous state of awareness. And, depending on the observer is looking on, will, depending on what state of consciousness, that mind that's looking on, if it's a pure witness, it'll see it all as it is. But if it isn't pure witness and it has to come down to a more conditioned level for whatever reason, because it wants to, or because it has to, or because it's bound there, and going inward to have an epiphany would be a special thing for that soul. But epiphany is where the yogi lives, and he has to come down to consider this, to talk about it, after the epiphany is already his natural state of awareness. So that's a Jativada, and a Parinama is the other great pillar, which means non-transformation, changelessness, immutability. There are good words for it in English. So you have transformation seeming to go on all the time, and people are 100% into that. They would be suspicious of it if it didn't change, which is why they won't sit still and just be quiet. See, like stone mountains. Just meditate on a stone mountain. It doesn't change for hundreds of years, as it were. So they're suspicious of something if it doesn't change. They won't stay away from it. They run away from their true self, which is changeless. So change is welcome to them, and they'll believe that it's actually changing. That's the problem. So that's called parinama in Sanskrit by the rishis. It's the changing Maya, and it's always pulling the wool over everyone's eyes. Enough said about that right now. We just had a whole class series on the evolutes of Maya before we started this one 3 weeks ago. We ended that series. But to put it more in terms of qualified truth, because you are, if you're not in non-dual samadhi all the time, and of course we know that Mahasharada told us you can't be in non-dual samadhi all the time. It's not possible for a human soul. After 11 days or so if you had that experience continually, you'd give up the body, just like a moth would fly into a bonfire. So you have to come down, like Sri Ramakrishna said, you can fly high as a bird, but you have to come down to a branch of a tree to rest once in a while. So the human condition is such, and the human mind is so limited as to feel comfortable on a branch, and will have some of its best ruminations there, as long as it doesn't fall off the branch and all the dangers on earth, then will grab onto it. But it stays in the branch and thinks about the flight it just had. See, this flight of the alone to the alone, they call it in Vedanta. It's the flight of the alone to the alone. It's the soul, moving, as we will look at soon, moving towards its true nature and cutting through all the layers as it does so, just sloughing it off like a snake would slough off its skin, as of no, never mind. So a jati and a parinama I'm giving you, because we'll have a chart on each of those, to discuss the principles of Brahman from the highest perspective. So I wanted to accent that before we actually get into it, and also say that that's the perspective they're coming from when they talk about this. So please don't find fault with them or doubt their non-dual experience and perspective when you hear them talking about things which the world needs to know about in its ignorance. Ignorance is a strange animal. It can be, in spiritual life we use the word avidya or ignorance to mean you just don't know who you are yet. You haven't found your path, you haven't found yourself, you haven't found the Lord, or you haven't found the truth of the formlessness of and changelessness of all things. You're still sucked into as the participant rather than the witness. But ignorance can be a lot of things on lower levels, and those lower levels are gradated. So one of the best ways, Saguna Brahman-wise, that the rishis told us was this: cosmic, collective, and individual. When the word is with God, and it's not one with God, then it's as if that power got separated from the source and now is let loose upon all the atmospheres. Like what's underlying again. The scientists would say what's underlying here is the universe, physical. The physical is underlying everything. But that word in Sanskrit is akasha, and there's 5 akashas, and each one underlies the other. See? So underlying the physical akasha is the prana akasha, energy, and underlying the energy akasha is the mind, mental akasha, thought, consciousness. That's underlying those 2. And then underlying those 3 is wisdom. Thought can go many ways, as you know, probably, as we found out, and we're seeing all the time in Maya how varied it is, and how changeable it is, and how undependable it is. But when it gets to the level of Gyanakasha, then it begins to become dependable. You can bet on it. You can go to the bank with it. You can begin to build your house on bedrock of it. And doing so lead to the finest of all akashas, the akasha of the spirit, or of the Atman, we'd call it. So those are Bhutakasha, Pranakasha, Chittakasha, and then Gyanakasha, and then Chid-akasha. There are other systems of 5 that you can point out, several others, but that's basically the Vedantic one. These 5 akashas, introduced to us by Lord Vashishta, one of the mind-born sons of the cosmic trinity, in the earliest of times, in the earliest of every time, because time also cycling all the time, so it appears to have a shelf life, and it appears to go away, but that's not the case at all. It's just constantly cycling. And the soul can get off that cycle and become timeless. It's a beautiful piece of jazz music we used to play in our musician days, a piece called Timeless, and we all loved it because it didn't have a time signature. You could roam around in it musically and express yourself. So timelessness, spacelessness, and so forth. We'll look at that a little deeper. So all of this an introductory to the way in which we will look at points and principles. Principles are the absolute truth, and we have to find some way of expressing them. Sanskrit is the best, we find, but there are English equivalents which will be adequate for us so that we can contemplate it so we can realize it. That's the point of coming down, just to go back. See, I want to look at it from a different perspective, like Vivekananda's famous analogy that he put in the 4 yogas of starting off in a rocket ship on Earth and taking pictures of the sun along the way. So you go back and deliver the pictures later. Found you couldn't get to the sun, you had to turn around after a while. But you go back to Earth and develop the pictures later, and you're looking at the same sun, but it looks different in every picture. So he used that as this way of explaining that the mind looking at Brahman, the sun of Brahman or the light of Brahman, as it gets closer, that's looking more and more like its real self. But further away, it looks less and less like its real self. It looks more like the world. It looks like a physical sun to you. So in that way, we have some very high points and principles. The principles are pretty much sacrosanct and inviolable and unchanging. The points aren't. They change inside of cycles, but the cycles become elongated the closer and closer they are to the Word and the Word to Brahman. So in the beginning was the Word. That's the beginning of one cycle when there are infinite cycles. There's not just one beginning and then one ending and poof, what's the point of that? The whole thing is based upon unchanging, all-pervasive reality, which is the light of consciousness or pure conscious awareness. And as we just said earlier, it can take rupa, it can take on forms, it can take on space, it can project ideas out of its own inner capacity. Call that the Word, if you will. So if we're using the Word as that progenitor of all manifestation, how to express itself in Tantra, like Shiva and Shakti, when they come together, they hum. It's like a bee and a flower. Ramakrishna used to use that analogy. When the bee is buzzing around the flower, it's making all sorts of noise. And then it lights on the flower, and it crawls up in it, and it begins to sip the nectar, and all the buzzing sound goes away, and you just hear this hum, this little inside the flower, you see, enjoying the nectar. It was a beautiful analogy he used for that soul that gets so deep into its true essence, the Word in this case, that it just hums there happily, joyfully, blissfully. And so that's what you would hear if you were in the realms of the Trinity, that is tied up inside that flower. And you're a black bee wanting to get closer and closer to that source. There's songs about that in India. So that starts us off on this chart. I want to give you a running commentary of a few minutes, because we have 4 classes to cover this. I think we can probably do it. But we should get a little guided entry so that we know what we're talking about when we're talking about points in the Upanishads. Things that Upanishads that I found they talk about a lot when they're not talking about non-duality. But don't forget, they're talking about those points inside of their realization of non-duality. That's the one rule of thumb here, so that you don't fall out with the tradition and the guru and the Dharma teacher and fail to stay long enough to know what non-duality really is and means to a soul that has to use words to describe it somehow, like Buddha did. So there's cosmic, collective, and individual. I put collective and individual, and remember we're talking about what I found was mentioned most in the 108 Upanishads when I did my early studies on it. And these are pretty much 10 or 11 of the Upanishads. I started studying the other, 98 or 99 that Shankara didn't comment on after that, and began having really wonderful meditations on, like the Akshi Upanishad and others, that I began to teach then in the classes. And you'll find them online and so forth. You can look them up and follow through with them. Amrita Bindu Upanishad, and it's really beautiful, that Shankara didn't have time to do commentaries on when he was alive. So this is what's been mentioned in the Upanishads that I saw got the most hits, if you want to put it in current times. What got the most hits that wasn't specifically non-dual? Let's look at it. what first got the most hits there, and let's skip the first one because that's the bridge into points. Into principles. So we're jumping from principles into, I put a Jativada there. Remember, none of this was created and it can't be destroyed. It's been projected by what? By the word or by the Mahat. So the first thing you hear, the main thing you hear the Upanishads speaking about, and these are rishis, many dozens of rishis that had non-dual experiences that then came out and wrote these, or actually recited these, memorized and recited these, wrote them down later, passed them on to their kids before writing was in vogue, as it were, in the Sanskrit, the ancient Sanskrit. So you'll find them talking most about, on the cosmic level first, of the Mahat, the great mind. And you could say Lord Brahma, or the Trinity. Probably also use the word Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic egg. What's that? Hiranmaye Parikoshe Virajan Brahmanishkalam. We were working on that sloka yesterday and memorizing it. So basically you have this cosmic egg. That's the whole universe, not just the physical universe, those 5 layers of universe, each one underlying the last. From gross to subtle to causal, if you want to put it into 3 levels. So they talk a lot about the Mahat, or God with form, the highest form that mankind can realize. And that's that refuge I was just talking about. You don't want to take refuge in the world if you're in India and you've been party to the truth of your ancestors and forefathers. You don't want to take refuge in the world. That's the last thing you'd want to do. You want to try and make the world work for you somehow, from the standpoint of peace and balance and helpfulness, When will man be friend to man? We were just quoting Swamiji on the ride over here today to the ashram. Oh, Lord, when will man be friend to man? Always violence and always hurting, all jealousy. So the Mahat, the Hiranyagarbha, the Trinity, Lord Brahma, Om, I think basically in this day and age they're almost equals one principle you can think about, the hub of all projection. And don't forget Divine Mother, who's overseeing all that. In the Rig Veda it says she breathed on the waters of Om, and in the testaments of Christianity, it's that the Lord breathes on the water. So you have both the same thing there. It's just that India reserved the father principle for formlessness, and the mother is in charge of everything that comes into form. I was saying Shiva and Shakti come together and they hum. We'll see that next week. Srishti Rahasya, the secret of creation or projection. Srishti Sthiti Lai is the teaching. Srishti is projection, Sthiti is how to keep it steady, Laya is how to dissolve it all, because it was a projection in the first place. So they thought about that early on. Srishti Sthiti Lai, the words are in a song. Even a song written even in 1700s, 1800s India. They're still thinking about it after all these centuries have gone by. And they'll continue to think about it in another cycle after this one that the Mahat is responsible for ends. 4 billion years is one day there in Lord Brahma's life, and another 4 billion is one night. So this is how time goes away, as we were just talking about. Timelessness, deathlessness, spacelessness. They're always thinking in terms of all of this dissolving. It's going away. It's rushing to make itself appear before me. I shouldn't be confused by that. I should just watch it and watch it then just dissolve away without any reaction to it. That's best for me, if my soul can do that, if I can be a witness of it. But if I get pulled into it, even 1 iota, then there's a chance for attachment, rebirth, and ignorance. There's that word ignorance again. You don't want that. You never have wanted that. And so a way of putting that is don't take refuge in the world. Don't take refuge in lower knowledge only. reference. We might want to put the intellectual frame of reference my teacher was always talking about. If you're going to take refuge in everything, and don't take refuge in heaven, as the Upanishads early on said, it's the heaven-aspiring senses that keep this cycle going. Your ancestors and you. Samsara, they call it. Where is it? Right there. Creation is attended by suffering. So that's at a cosmic level you're talking about. Sure, we can say, oh, look at the suffering in this poor world. Even more evident now than before, because people are all of a sudden being made aware of it by the media and by fear and by whatever else is out there. But it's still all samsaric, and it passes continually. That's one of the good things about it, is to know that it passes, or that everything passes. All things must pass. It's even in a pop song in the 60s. All things must pass. Somebody heard from someone that that was the case. And it was that someone was Mother India in one of her many forms. So, just a little bit of comment about the Mahat. I actually wanted to make this introduction very quick so we just see the points. These are the points in the Upanishads. Next was yagya. The cosmos proceeds via sacrifice. That's huge. And we've forgotten it, basically, in this day and time. Our sacrifice is pretty much slimmed down, and here I go with too much commentary again, but pretty much slimmed down to just our own job and our own family and our own household, if it's even there. If people are even doing much sacrifice, say for their children. Oh, I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of time to explain this to you. You got an hour? Well, do you, Dad? Do you, Mom? Are you going to be rishi-like and tell me, you know, what I've never heard before in my many lifetimes, and why I'm suffering so much in grade school and high school, why I want out, why I'm getting depressed, why I want a pill, why I want suicide? Speaking to a soul just 2 days ago, I want to kill myself over the phone at the top of the voice. See? So where does that all come from? If not, you didn't have time to hear the truth that will set you free. The truth is lower truth too, but not just secular truth. Lower truth is here in India. It cuts high. When you take Mother Kali's sword and she cuts off your head, it's cutting at a very high level. She says, you've already understood this. Now maybe you can get to this and put it together as one world, one consciousness. If you've fallen so low as to get to samsara down, it's going to be a far cry if you don't have a family guru living in your neighborhood like they did in India, the Kula Guru system, for several thousand years. You sent your kids to them. Here, take some firewood. Somebody once brought me a couple pieces of firewood to the Portland ashram. I looked at him, he looked at me, we laughed. I knew what he was meaning. We didn't say a word. Come to learn. So your parents did that to you, probably because they didn't know it yet well enough. Number two, they didn't have time to do it because they were trying to raise you. So this is the problem in samsara. And we know all too well about all that, but what we don't know too well is how to diffuse it, how to keep our peace of mind in the midst of it, and how to live a balanced life, and a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings, as the Upanishads state. So sacrifice, we'll get into that. I have a couple of charts on it that's beautiful, how to bring back sacrifice. Srishti Rahasya already commented on it. It's the secret of creation. Creation here would always mean projection, because you can't create something out of nothing. So if you were able to create, say, like a sculpture here on Earth, a sculpture or a musical piece or something, you'd know that it came from somewhere inside of you, and it wasn't new. Like babies aren't new. See? You're born here and they're all celebrating, you're crying. And then by the time you die, you're crying and they're crying and you're celebrating. If you're an enlightened soul, say, oh, he's dying, like Ramana Maharshi, oh, He's going to leave us. And he's like looking at this cancer in his elbow and saying, they say I'm going to leave them, but where will I go? You see, he like realized the all-pervasiveness of everything. Looking at these people weeping because his old physical form's about to be eaten up by some disease that you'll never cure. And there he is just going, where will I go? They're sending me somewhere. It's like, if there's any reason for panic, it would be that. Where are they sending me? To hell? To heaven? Not heaven, please. I'd rather go to hell than to heaven. At least I'll wake up there. So basically, people are placing conditionings over you from the very first breath you take. And if you realize that about this world, that this projection can go on as long as they want it to at these levels, especially at these levels of mind. 1 billion years one day, 1 billion years another, one night. Then at a very high level there's exquisite enjoyment going on. The bliss of Brahman is everywhere. And you're far beyond this world and very close to your soul. Your true soul, your true self. Atman. Srishti Rahasya is a very beautiful thing, so we'll look at that process in Tantra. Samsara is next, and how it's attended by suffering. After that, Rayim Prana Brahma. Matter and energy come from Brahman. So we'll find out how that happens and how the Upanishads describe that, like in Srishti Rahasya. That's Tantra's view of it. But when you're talking about Upanishads and Vedanta and so forth, how it comes as a projection and a false appearance over things, how there's a sleight of hand by Maya, is a way to study that. And you do it by looking at the prana, which carries things. And if you've lost track of the prana, like Vivekananda said, happened to the West, you don't know what prana is. You came here, you don't know what tanmatras are, and you don't know what prana is. And I think that was probably happening to the West even in Jesus' time. You know, come along, I'll make you fishers of men, but first, you know, let's show you that man does not live by bread alone. What's that mean? He doesn't live by conventional life. He dies by it. If you live by making bread and putting it in your mouth and having to spend all your time stuffing it down your children's throats so that they live, then you're not living at all. You've died already. If you undercover the prana, you can live on the prana for days without eating. And the yogis do. I mean, that's really the state you should be in. Don't eat too much, don't eat too little. Moderate your appetites. Not just food appetites, your sensual appetites. And also your attraction to prana, because that can also be a problem. The ancestors are very attached to prana. It's called rebirth. That's how rebirth goes on, is through the prana. Through energy going from mother, to fetus, and after death, the soul going to the ancestors, and then energy sending it back into the fetus. And people know this; they've heard it, but they either aren't interested or they don't believe in it. And they probably are just running away from the fact because they don't want to think about death. They found themselves in a form. That's fine. Let's keep it that way. They'd live that way forever if you let them. I've seen people 102 years old still clinging to their decrepit old body and not wanting to leave because of fear of death, or because they just want to be able to get up and have breakfast again. At 102 years old, their taste buds aren't even working right. But the habit is there, see. Clinging to life, abhinavesha, by the father of yoga, fifth and lowest hell that you can fall into in yoga. So if you realize that all of this is coming from Brahman, that's an inward trajectory. Then you discover prana, psychic prana. You'd see how it all works. You'd say, like Buddha, maybe I want to get off this merry-go-round. I don't want to do this anymore. There must be a thing called freedom. If there's a thing called bondage and they're obviously in it, then there must be something called freedom, and I obviously want it. See? Going on too long about it, but sarvam prane ejati is prana, gross and subtle, pervades everything. So that's how we would move on to just study two forms, two aspects of prana. Then omkara. Om is the key for the door to freedom. So these are what I found in the Upanishads at a cosmic level, when they're not talking specifically about Ayam Atma Brahma or Pragyanam Brahma or Aham Brahmasmi, the non-dual statements and what they mean, like in the Brahma Sutras. They're talking about this. This is taking refuge in the feet of the Lord. It all came out, rolling out of the Word, which was one with God, and all came through the Trinity. And if you see it that way, you're bringing the non-dual perspective with you when you're in samsara, or when you have to try and control your prana if you've lost control of it. It's going to be a much better ride for you. A quick inspection of what's there and a quick rejection of it because it's unreal, as Vedanta would put it. The word unreal in Vedanta is huge, as they say. You could go on unwrapping that forever, what unreal means. And you could show how it's, everyone is running after it all the time. Their whole life is based on the unreal. According to the yogis, what's daytime to the all-cognizing muni is nighttime. To the bound soul, Krishna says in the Gita. So he's living in the light of pure consciousness, and they're going, oh, God hurts, you see. Get it out of here. That's the devil's work, or something, you see. It's all backwards. But what's nighttime to the all-cognizing muni is daytime to the worldly person. So he's looking at what they like and what they go after, and he goes, that hurts, you see. That's true suffering there. They're in samsara, above their nose by then. They're like a fish out of water. See a fish out of water with its gills working? It can't bear oxygen. So all of those cosmic, this probably before the break our introduction will get done if I move along. If they were to come down to a qualified non-dualistic level, or a dualistic level even, because in India dualism is a beautiful thing. I've often made the comment that here we have a kind of dualism that sort of pits religion against politics or against science. So this is the kind of dualism we're wrestling with, even in religion. Or if we do become religionists in a 2,000-year-old Semitic religion that came from the Middle East, then we're doing it in a very fundamentalist way. This is the only way to go. This is our religion, it's the best. We'll go to war to prove it, you see. I mean, everything has fallen apart that makes any sense by that time. It's a kind of fundamentalism that doesn't even do justice to the word dualism, Advaita. In India, Advaita is that God exists, and that's the highest. And the soul exists, and it wants God, but it can never be one with it. See, that's a Madhva. You see, Ramanuja has a qualified non-dual philosophy, and Shankara has the non-dual philosophy. That's how it's put out in the tradition. So if you're at the dualistic level, it's not like God doesn't exist, and I must run after the world. It's that God exists, and it's the highest, but I'll never be one with it. I can only be the devotee of it. So they become the devotee of it. And that's where you'll find many of these points mentioned in the Upanishads. It's, second best, maybe third best thing to do, because you're taking refuge still in the feet of the Lord. Panchayagya, sacrifice is your first duty. So we'll look at the 5 kinds of sacrifices. I have a chart on that. 5 kinds of sacrifices you're supposed to do every day. And it includes the animals and insects. and the whole hierarchy. You do sacrifices to this principle. Guru moksha, guru is required for liberation in the Upanishads. Vivekananda said, you can go to the top of the Himalayas or to the top of the Caucasus, or you can go to the Gobi Desert or the Sahara. You can go to the bottom of the ocean or the tip of Mount Everest. You'll never find liberation until you find a guru. So he's that adamant about it. And he'll follow it up by, you'll never get enlightenment from books, scriptures, holy places. You can only get it from another soul. That is, it can only be epitomized by the living liberated, the Jivan Mukta. And then as you see that and you say, I want that, I know it exists because I've seen it with my own eyes. But you won't see it in a book or in a temple. Not that intensely. So in books and temples vain thy search, thine only is the hand that holds the rope that drags thee on. So cease lament, let go thy hold. Say Om Tat Sat Om. I am that. I am that that's in my teacher. I am that which is in Jesus. I want to be perfect like he is. And comes right down to it, I am. If I slough off the darkness of ignorance, then there's no difference between us. I'm holding it, he isn't. How much of it am I holding? And how long will it take me to breathe free? I want everyone to be free as the air they breathe. I am no master to anyone, Vivekananda said. Not even to the sannyasins. They should all be following their own path to freedom. Or be a lamp unto thyself, if you want to put it that way. So this is where the collective becomes very important to India. It's beginning to talk about that and this. The illumined beings are teachers of men. Atmagyan Hyarchayat. So you must have this guru principle, and that's in you too. It's required for liberation, but you'll be able to see it in another and therefore know that it's in yourself. And that's by way of example. As my teacher once told us, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, peace and bliss be upon him, he said in India, Jesus is an exemplar, but here in the West, to you, he's a savior. But India doesn't believe in saviors; it believes in exemplars, because it knows that you've got to find this. You have to do this work yourself. You find a great teacher is necessary, so you can see what it looks like. Then find it yourself. The teacher ruins everything by thinking he teaches, Vivekananda said. Hands off the student. Just epitomize and exemplify the truth and teach the Dharma, and then let them walk the path. That way they'll get rid of their own ignorance and know that it was self-actuated. If you get rid of it for them, if you're so fortunate, because it can happen in Guru Yoga, and sometimes that's dicey too, as we know, like some recent kinds of Shaktipat gurus and things that aren't all they say they're supposed to be. But if you just get a seed planted and you water it yourself, you're going to get the whole experience of growing the tree and eating the fruits. You can't walk up to the guru's tree and say, can I have your fruits? And expect him to give them to you all. He might give you a bite, but you've got to grow your own tree. And you put a fence around that tree when it's young, as Ramakrishna said, so that it can grow. It will be eaten by cattle if you don't. So the spiritual life is very specific to this, what we call sadhana. So there's another aspect of this, rishi jnana triptaha, the masterful, the attained, and the aspiring. So you'll find the Upanishads talking about these three levels. Actually, there are 4 levels to the Brahmagyani, someone who knows Brahman. And they've reached different levels of the 7 stages of higher knowledge. It's a very beautiful system that we've actually given classes on. Sapta Jnana Bhumikas, they're called, and then the 4 levels of knower of Brahman. So that's Rishi Jnana. Rishi, of course, is the great seer. Jnana is that special knowledge they possess. So you're going to want to know that some of them are past masters, and some are very masterful. Some of them are adept, and there's some that are advanced and still aspiring for higher climbs. Like Lord Buddha said, like swans leaving a mountain lake and going up to a next higher mountain lake, and then finding that they just have this great thirst for this pure, clear Himalayan waters, see, that untouched by anyone or anything. So they'll take the trouble to fly higher and deeper. There's sadhu sangha, holy company, is a necessity. So I found all of those four things mentioned by the rishis of the Upanishads, and they all had a different tone to me, and a little bit different level of occupation on that ladder of inward ascension. Abhyasa yoga, Atman is attained by constant practice. I skipped sadhana. Actually I skipped a couple. After sadhu satsanga, there's shishyachara. You must be qualified. Hopefully, and it's not so evident nowadays or usual that Westerners would come to an enlightened teacher qualified. They're going to have to pretty much start where their karmas dictate. And that's not always a good thing. But they also have some good karmas, so the teacher will take them. And as long as you maybe don't use the teacher for a marriage counselor or a psychotherapist or something like that, but you use the teacher actually for teachings of the Dharma and listen and follow, you'll make progress. As Milarepa says, you will find your way if you have holy company. So holy company, but if you come there qualified to hear those words, you'll stay. And if not, you'll drift away. We see it all the time. So this on again, off again, running hot, running cold complaint that I have about teaching Westerners over the past 30 or 35 years, sharing the Dharma with them, is how I express that. They come and they go. And that's what Krishna puts it in the Gita too. Then another thing the Upanishads talk about a lot is para aparavid. That is, there are two kinds of knowledge, and it's very good to make that distinction, especially here in these times, in the secular West. Oh, there's a higher knowledge? You mean like science and higher mathematics and physics and so forth? Oh no, that's still lower knowledge to them. It departs the atmospheres, the climes of earth or anything physical, and at least goes to the prana, which we have now told you about in the Upanishads, and then to the psychic prana, and then to the mahat, and then to the word, and so forth. So, vacha niyacha, tam niyachatmani, niyacha, buddhau diyam, tam purnatmani, buddhi sakshini. So that basically Shankara says, take these words and dissolve them into the mind, think about them, dissolve the mind then that's well thought and qualified into the intellect. With the intellect it brightens them up, and take that intellect back to the ego and show it to it. See? You've got this penchant for aparavid, lower knowledge, and you think it's everything. It's it's like you're it's like your pet. See? But now I'm going to show you something that's much higher than that. And this is this distilled knowledge, like boiling treacle and turning it into hard rock candy. It's got this finer and finer stages of sweetness to it. And so there you are at this level, dissolving what the ego knows into the what the intellect knows into the ego, and then the ego finds out that I'm not all so great as I thought I was. There's a witness to me. And sak buddhi shakshini, it's intelligent and it's a witness of everything. And so that's putting it very succinctly and very clearly. Yacha chanyacha atmani, so everything has to be, and then finally it says, dissolve the witness back into the Atman, and the Atman into Brahman, because Brahman is the soul of everything. So that's just a fast way of saying, take all of this and just dissolve it, isn't it? And practice it every day, that dissolution, until this doesn't seem so real to you anymore. It just comes and goes. Now I see the rising and falling of things, and I see that there's a witness to it, and I see that I can get above it, and I shouldn't get pulled into it as being real. It's all a projection of the mind. It's coming out of me, and I can turn it off and turn it on as I like. I can attach and detach, attach to it and detach from it as I wish. Then you go back up here and you see why there are people who are aspiring, and some who are attained, and some who are masterful. So if you knew that ahead of time, then these teachings of two kinds of knowledge would be shown up to you quite well. Oh, I see there's some souls there who know a lot about things I know nothing about. I better go apprentice them. Then, niskama karma. We have to know that the Upanishads talk about scripturally ordained works, and that if you can't just let go of everything at once, then you should just slim down your activities and the thoughts that attend upon them to this what the scriptures tell you to do, according to your capacity, and live your life like that for a while. You can expand your capacity later, but right now you're going to have to reduce these activities that are causing you so many distractions. It's actually a fine teaching for today. Niskama karma, that is doing works without desire. And chit-shuddhi is next. Purification of mind is the way. So that would be beyond impure mind, which is the senses fastening to everything and seeking everything you can get for them selfishly. That's impure mind. And then a mixed mind would be a mind that would start to think more altruistically about it. And maybe all these things have a greater purpose than just my satisfaction. I can share this with others, and maybe even my children, like I said. Sit down and tell them what objects really mean, how they're empty, how they won't fulfill you, but how you can see them as your own intelligence and as thoughts, and how you can rise above them and detach from them and take them and leave them, like the yogi does. So this would be a way of purifying the mind by stages, from ashuddhi to shuddha-shuddhi to chit-shuddhi, impure to mixed, pure and impure, to pure, chit-shuddhi. Shuddhi means pure. That's very coveted by the wise, pure mind. Indriya shuddhi is also, Indra gets a lot of mention in the Upanishad. Pure senses will help reveal the self. And you can probably realize by now that, of course, we are coming down, just to use words from highest to lowest. If you went upwards, you'd see how all of it's connected inward. Upwards means inward, of course, in India. Not looking up, but looking in. So pure senses would help reveal the self. So probably why people aren't getting realization of their true natures, because the senses are acting as their mediary. The impure senses acting as their mediaries. Like the great songs in India, what good are these hands if they just grasp selfishly? And what good is this tongue if it just eats food and never sings the names of the Lord? And what good are these eyes if. So it's take all the senses to task and purify them. And then try your life out now with these five senses, and probably the inner senses would occur to you then, the tanmatras and so forth. The inner worlds would begin to open up to you. And the Upanishads talk about dhyan. Brahman is revealed via meditation. So they talk more about meditation in the Upanishads than you'll hear about it in the Gita, for instance. So that's a very important thing to the rishis, is to have this fourth yoga going on the whole time. That's really helping you develop this witness consciousness that jnana yoga can lead you to by dissolution. It is a kind of dissolution to meditate. And people don't usually think of it that way, but that's why putting together jnanam and jnanam is a very good thing. Because you have something powerful to meditate on when you can't meditate on Brahman. Back to my original opening words today about how to consider the Dharma from a qualified non-dualistic position without forsaking or forgetting the non-dual premise from which it comes from. Finally, there you see karma vinasha. All karma should end in realization. So you want to, as speaking of the Gita, like Sri Krishna says in the Gita, you want to take karma and make it into karma sannyasa, basically with some stages in between. And that would, of course, occur to you later with only do the works that are beneficial for yourself and to others. Make sure you give up the detrimental ones, or the distracting ones, or not necessarily the painful ones, because sometimes the painful ones will help you. It doesn't just mean, oh look, for the pie in the sky kind of teaching, which they were doing with Indian teachings back in the 60s, some of these spurious teachers that came here. But of course with Krishna, and from Krishna to Ramakrishna, I like to say, and then add on Vivekananda, the great soul of the day, perfect man, then you'll find out that it's very important to do all work as worship, or all labor as love. That brings us to this sloka at the bottom from the Aitareya Upanishad, one of the Upanishads I gathered many of these teachings out of. So it says there, the gods, guardians of the universe, fell into the mighty ocean of existence and samsara. So it's very possible that you are a much higher being than you think yourself to be. And there's much better things to be than a human being, our founder said before he passed away here. And so you're probably a god or goddess that fell into the ocean of samsara, or the ocean of relative existence. So the gods, guardians of the universe, that's their original role, fell into the mighty ocean of existence. The Creator subjected them to hunger and thirst. The gods then spoke to him, saying, "Grant us a place where we can establish ourselves and eat food." He brought them a cow's body, and it was not sufficient for them. He then brought them a horse's body, and it too was not sufficient. Then he brought them the form of a man. Seeing that form, they rejoiced and exclaimed with joy, "Well done." Therefore mankind is called, indeed, well done, well done. So this is, of course, the voice of the Upanishads. It's not the voice of a text-tortured Bible of the day. See, where dualism isn't even present in it. There's dualism present there, isn't it? But what's the message? You were once a god, and beyond that, you're well done. If you find yourself here as a man, you're really better than a god. It was good that you fell into the ocean of samsara, because the gods are attached to their levels of existence, and they can't evolve. People are still asking questions when they study the Raja Yoga with me about karma and how can I do away with it in dream? And no, you can't. You can only do away with it where you created it. And that's here on earth. And then you can turn your dreams into radiant meditations. And that's really what happens when you have lucid dreaming that they're talking about nowadays. You do the work here on earth to perfect yourself. You bring light into your waking state. If you can bring light into your waking state, then it's going to happen to you naturally in all other states. You'll join the A with the U, with the M, and the whole world, the whole word with Turiya, with the highest state, which is another teaching out of the Upanishad. So you can see how they would use this teaching of reincarnation and embodiment, and how the Creator, or Lord Brahma, whom we talked about at the very height here, is the grand projection at a cosmic level, and all these souls that are using the light of Brahman or Atman to fashion, to feather their nest, to fashion these different worlds in which they can go to and have different bodies and different experiences. Fall that low into the ocean of relative existence, then that's something that would have been better never to have happened. But if it does happen, you should be able to transform it, that poison, into nectar, because there's your doorway into formlessness, back to Ajativada. You can, from here, where you are right now in a human form, you can shut it all down if you want. There's a lot against you in that attempt, because enlightenment is a razor's-edged path. Vitistata jagrata prapya varani bodhita ksharasyadara. Swamiji used to love that sloka. It's a razor's-edged path, and it's hard to navigate. So there's a lot against that, but that's the highest goal. And when that's brought forward to you, to a sincere soul, they'll climb this ladder. And they'll find, they'll qualify themselves, they'll find a teacher, they'll hear the teachings, and they'll work their way inward to, by whichever method, meditation, dissolution of the mind in Jnanam, even bhakti, although they say that takes longer. It's the long, slow boat to India, that trip. And of course, unless it's very intense, you can get quickly realized through intense love of the Lord, as Sri Ramakrishna epitomized, along with all other paths he walked. So this has been a quick introduction and explanation of what we'll be studying over the next 3.5 classes. As we're going to take our break now, and we'll start taking some of these with individual charts and see what is meant by these cosmic, collective, and individual levels of things. And that'll take us through the month of September, and it'll be a very illumined September for us if we take stock of the teachings and work them into our lives. So here, let's pause then for a break.